I burned your house to wake you up.
You used me.
Duke, zero!
The fire from the glass house was still painting the rear-view mirror orange as I tore down the coastal highway. The SUV was a clean vehicle, untraceable, armored, and stocked. But I wasn't looking at the road. My mind was locked on the manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat next to Duke. The label simply read PHOENIX. Inside was a single photograph and a set of coordinates. The photo showed a man I had buried 20 years ago, Colonel Vance, my commanding officer. The man who taught me how to shoot, how to think, how to vanish. We watched his helicopter go down in the Hindu Kush. We found the wreckage. We found the bodies. Or so we thought. Now, looking at this grainy surveillance photo taken 2 days ago in a rainy Seattle shipyard, the truth hit me harder than any bullet. He wasn't dead. He was the architect. The invisible man wasn't a system, it was him. He had built the glass house. He had authorized the tests. He had turned me into a lab rat. Why? To see if I was still sharp enough to be reactivated. The rage I felt wasn't hot like the fire behind me, it was cold. Absolute zero. I looked at Duke. He was sitting tall, sensing the shift in my energy. We weren't survivors anymore. We were assassins on a business trip. I punched the coordinates into the nav system. It wasn't a safe house. It was a decommissioned naval yard in Bremerton. The graveyard of ships, fitting. That's where ghosts go to hide. We drove through the night, crossing state lines before the sun came up. The agency, or whatever Vance's shadow organization called itself, had left me a credit card in the glove box with an infinite limit. They wanted me to play their game. Fine, but I was going to buy my own pieces. I stopped at a storage unit I kept off the books in Oregon. It was a dusty metal box to anyone else, but inside, it was a museum of violence. I unlocked the rolling door. The smell of gun oil and stale air welcomed me like an old friend. I didn't grab the hunting rifles or the defensive shotguns this time. I went to the back, to the pelican cases buried under tarps. I pulled out the HK-416 with the suppressed short barrel, the 6 RP-226 with the extended mags, flashbangs, breaching charges, and for Duke, I pulled out his old tactical vest. Kevlar weave, modular camera mount, stab-proof. As I strapped it onto him, he didn't wag his tail. He stood statue still, letting me tighten the buckles. He knew what this meant. The vest meant war. I looked at my reflection in the mirror of the storage unit. The man looking back wasn't the bearded hermit from the Yukon or the victim from the glass house. He was the soldier. And he had a list of names to cross out. First name Vance. Bremerton. The sky was a bruised gray, weeping a constant, freezing drizzle. The naval yard was a labyrinth of rusting giants aircraft carriers, waiting to be turned into razor blades. The coordinates led to the USS Monarch, a decommissioned carrier sitting in dry dock Fourth. It was a mountain of steel, dark and silent, but not empty. I parked a mile away and we moved in on foot, using the shadows of the shipping containers. The perimeter fence had been cut and repaired with zip ties. Amateur work. For a trap, I scanned the flight deck with my monocular. Thermal signature check. There. 2 heat spots patrolling the bridge. Snipers. Vance wouldn't be alone. He would have a Praetorian guard of faceless men. I touched my earpiece, though there was no one on the other end. Old habits. Duke. Silent mode, I signaled with a hand gesture. We slipped through the cut fence. The ground was slick with oil and rain. Every step had to be perfect. If they spotted us now, we'd be pinned down in a kill zone with 0 cover. We weren't just infiltrating a ship, we were breaking into a floating fortress designed to survive a world war. We bypassed the main ramp. Too obvious. Instead, we climbed the anchor chain of a support tug docked next to the carrier, jumping the gap to a maintenance hatch on the hull. I used a thermal Lancet pocket-sized torch that burns at 4,000 degrees to melt the lava. It hissed quietly, dripping molten steel onto the dark water below we were in. The interior of the ship was a tomb. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in the color of blood. The air tasted of rust and diesel. We moved up through the lower decks, heading for the Combat Information Center CIC in the tower. That's where Vance would be. He always liked the high ground. Suddenly Duke froze. He didn't growl, he just lowered his body, pointing his nose at a junction ahead. I heard it too. Footsteps. Fast, rhythmic, heavy. A patrol. I pulled Duke into a recessed alcove behind a bundle of pipes. 3 men walked past. They weren't wearing the white masks this time. They were wearing full heavy combat gear, night vision goggles, and carrying suppressed MP7s. These were Tier 1 operators. Vance hadn't hired mercenaries, he had activated a death squad. I waited until the last man passed, then I stepped out. No gun. Too loud. I grabbed him in a chokehold, dragging him into the dark before his boots could scrape the floor. A quick snap. He went limp. I lowered him silently. 1 down, 50 to go. But as I checked his body, his radio crackled. Team 4 report. We have a heartbeat sensor trigger in Sector 7. They knew we were here. Stealth was over. We moved fast, trading silence for violence. We fought our way up for decks, clearing corners with ruthless efficiency. Duke was a blur of teeth and fur, taking down gunmen before they could raise their rifles. I was the follow-up shot. Double tap. Move, double tap, move. We breached the bridge door with a shaped charge, BOON. The heavy steel door blew inward, flattening the guard behind it. I stormed in through the smoke, rifle raised, scanning for targets. The bridge was filled with tech, server racks, satellite tube links, map tables, and standing at the far end, looking out the reinforced windows at the gray ocean, was a man. He didn't turn around. He was wearing a great wrench coat, hands clasped behind his back. "You're late, Marcus," he said. His voice hadn't changed in 20 years. "Gravel and authority. I expected you 5 minutes ago." I kept my aim on the back of his head. "Turn around, Vance." Slowly, he turned. It was him. Older, grayer with a burn scar running down the left side of his face. The souvenir from the crash I thought had killed him. He wasn't armed. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Put the gun down, son. You didn't come here to kill me. You came here because you want the list. You want to know who really burned your house, who really ordered the hit on the senator." He tapped a thick black ledger sitting on the map table. "It's all here, but if you pull that trigger, the encryption key dies with me, and you'll never know why they chose you." The bridge of the aircraft carrier was silent, save for the hum of the servers and the sound of rain rumming against the reinforced glass. My finger hovered over the trigger of the HK-416, taking up the 2 pounds of slack, 8 which. That's all it would take to paint the console with the brains of the man who had turned my life into a simulation. Vance looked at me, his eyes tired but unafraid. He knew me better than I knew myself. He knew that I wasn't a murderer, I was a soldier. And soldiers don't kill intelligence assets until they've been debriefed. "You have 10 seconds. I said, my voice slow and dangerous. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't finish what the crash started." Vance sighed, walking slowly to the map table, ignoring the rifle barrel tracking his skull. "Because you're thinking small, Marcus. You're thinking about houses and revenge. I'm thinking about the world order." He placed his hand on the black ledger. The glass house wasn't torture. It was a calibration. I needed to know if you were still the weapon I forged in Kandahar, because the enemy we are facing, they aren't smugglers like Kruger. They are the people who hire the smugglers. They are the architects of the chaos you've been fighting your whole life. I didn't fake my death to retire. I went underground to build this list. And now I'm too old to pull the trigger. But you're just getting started. I didn't lower the weapon, but I eased the pressure on the trigger. Open it. Vance nodded and flipped the heavy cover of the ledger. It wasn't a tablet. It wasn't a hard drive. It was paper. Old. Yellowing pages filled with handwritten notes, coordinates, and bank routing numbers. "Why paper?" I asked. "Because paper can't be hacked," Vance replied, tapping a page. "The people on this list own the satellites. They own the NSA. If I put this on a server, we'd be dead in 4 minutes. This book is the only physical record of the Syndicate. 5 names, 5 pillars of a shadow empire." He spun the book around so I could see. The names were coded, but the locations were real. Berlin, Macau, Dubai, Rio, Moscow. Beside each location was a dossier of crimes that would make a dictator blush. Arms trafficking, political assassinations, engineered famines. "These men are the Hydra," Vance said. "You cut off one head like Senator Clay and Timur Grobek, unless you burn the heart. This book gives us the locations of the 5 heads, but to get close to them, you need clearance. You need intel. You need me." He looked at Duke, who was watching him with a low growl. "And I need you. I have the map, Marcus. But you are the only one who can walk the path." I reached out and pulled the book towards me, keeping my eyes on Vance. I scanned the first page. Target Alpha, codenamed the Alchemist, location Berlin. Germany. Who is he? I asked. Dr. V. Maurice Thorne, Vance answered. Former chemical weapons specialist for the regime. Now, he develops designer pathogens for the highest bidder. The gas they used on you in the glass house, that was his recipe. He's hosting a private auction in 3 days at an underground club in Kreuzberg. He's selling a new aerosol delivery system. If that sale goes through, a lot of innocent people die. I looked at the photo of Thorne, pale, unassuming, wearing a bespoke suit. He looked like a banker, but his eyes were dead. This was the man who poisoned me. The personal connection flared up, burning hot. Vance saw it. He's the first domino, Marcus. We take him. We get his laptop. His laptop leads us to the next name. It's a chain reaction. I work alone, I said, finally lowering the rifle. Me and the dog, not this time. Vance shook his head. Berlin is a surveillance state. You need a handler. You need extraction. You need logistical support. You work with me, or you die in a German prison. I was about to answer to tell him that if he ever crossed me again, he'd let Duke use his throat as a chew toy when the ship shuddered. It wasn't an engine starting. It was an impact. A dull, heavy thud against the hull, followed by the scream of twisting metal. The reed emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness before the backup blue LEDs kicked in. We have company, Vance said, his voice devoid of surprise. He moved to the console, tapping rapidly on a keyboard. Perimeter breach. Sector 4 and 9th. They're coming from the water. Ooh. I racked the slide of my rifle. The Syndicate, Vance replied, pulling a 6-hour P320 from a hidden compartment under the desk. They didn't just track you, Marcus. They tracked the book. They sent a cleanup crew. Duke started barking at the port side door, the hair on his back standing up. Through the rain-slicked window, I saw the silhouette of a stealth helicopter rising silently from the deck below. It's Minigan, spinning up. Get down! I roared, tackling Vance, just as the glass wall shattered inward. Thousands of rounds of high-caliber ammunition shredded the bridge, turning the servers and map tables into sparking confetti. We crawled behind the heavy steel command console as the minigun chewed up the room. The noise was deafening, a continuous roar of destruction. The book, Vance shouted, pointing at the ledger lying on the exposed floor, surrounded by broken glass. I got it. I yelled back. I grabbed a flashbang from my vest, pulled the pin, and tossed it blindly over the console towards the window. BANG. The blinding white light disoriented the pilot for a split second. That was all I needed. I lunged forward, grabbed the ledger, and shoved it into my dump pouch. Move to the stairwell. We sprinted for the exit, Duke leading the way. The helicopter swung around for another pass, but we were already in the corridor. We weren't fighting alone anymore. Vance moved well for an old man, checking corners, his weapon handling precise. We reached the lower deck, but the way was blocked. A squad of mercenaries wearing thermal cloaks and futuristic whatnots was cutting through the bulkhead We were pinched. The cargo elevator, Vance said. Panting, it leads to the mini sub-bay. It's our only way out. I looked at him. I hated him. I didn't trust him. But he was right. I tossed him a fresh magazine. You miss, we die, I growled. Vance caught the mag, a grim smile on his face. I never miss. We turned together, rifles raised as the blast door blew open. The deal was sealed in gunpowder. The Blacklist hunt had begun. Berlin doesn't sleep, it just waits in the shadows. We arrived via a military transport plane, landing on a defunct airstrip outside the city limits. Vance had safe houses everywhere, relics of the Cold War. This one was a brutalized concrete apartment in East Berlin, smelling of damp plaster and old secrets. While Vance set up his digital fortress, screens, encrypted comms, satellite uplinks, I cleaned my weapons. The contrast was jarring. He fought wars with keyboards and phone calls. I fought them with 9 hollow points. Dr. Thorne is paranoid, Vance said, pulling up a schematic on the monitor. He never leaves his sanctuary. A club called Die Group, the Pit. It's an old industrial slaughterhouse converted into a techno dungeon. The music is loud enough to hide gunshots, and the strobe lights are blinding enough to hide a murder. He pointed to the sublevel of the building. The auction starts at midnight. Thorne will be in the VIP section behind bulletproof glass, surrounded by his specimens. You need to get close enough to clone his phone or grab his hard drive. If he releases the aerosol, everyone in that club dies. I looked at Duke. He was pacing, restless. The city noise bothered him. We don't go through the front door, I said, strapping on my vest. We go through the veins. The pit lived up to its name. Even from 2 blocks away, I could feel the bass vibrating in the pavement. We bypassed the mile-long line of club kids waiting in the freezing rain and circled to the loading docks. Vance was in my ear, guiding us. Heat sensors show 3 guards at the rear entrance. Heavy weaponry. I didn't need sensors, Duke had already locked onto them. We moved through the shadows of the industrial containers. The air smelled of ozone, stale beer, and something sharper, chlorine, the chemical deliveries. I used the noise of the club to mask our movement. When the bass dropped, I moved. I took the first guard down with a bullet on strike to the throat, silent, non-lethal. Duke handled the second one, getting him to the ground with a growl that promised immediate amputation if he moved. The third guard barely had time to turn before I put him to sleep. We dragged the bodies behind a dumpster. I picked the lock of the service door. The blast of sound that hit us was physical. We were in the belly of the beast. The corridor vibrated with the manic energy of the rave above. But down here, it was cold, sterile concrete. The Alchemist slab was close. We navigated the service tunnels, moving towards the VIP sector. The walls were sweating condensation. The music was a relentless, hammering rhythm that made it hard to think. I checked my gas mask pouch ready. Duke was struggling. The sensory input was overwhelming for him, but he stayed glued to my leg, trusting my lead. We reached a ventilation grate. overlooking the main dance floor. Below us, a sea of bodies moved in a trance under frantic laser lights. And there, on a suspended balcony enclosed in glass at the court of the Alchemist, Dr. exactly like his photo, pale, thin, wearing a pristine white suit that glowed under the UV lights. He was holding court with 3 buyers, a warlord from Sudan, a cartel boss from Mexico, and a suit I didn't recognize. On the table between them sat a silver canister, the weapon. Vance's voice crackled in my ear. Marcus, thermal scans show the canister is active. If that seal breaks, it's airborne in seconds. You can't shoot it. You have to secure it. Securing a biological weapon in a room full of armed bodyguards while 1,000 civilians dance below. Suicide. Just the way I like it. I cut the power to the VIP section. The lights in the glass box died, plunging Thorn and his buyers into confusion. In the chaos, I breached the door. Flash bang. The explosion of light and sound stunned the guards. I dropped 2 of them before they hit the floor. Thorn grabbed the silver canister and bolted towards his private exit. "Duke, sick," I shouted. Duke launched himself like a missile, ignoring the gunfire, chasing the white suit. I followed, stepping over the writhing guards. We burst into a back room that looked like a greenhouse from hell. Glass tanks filled with bubbling green liquids lined the walls. Strange, mutated plants grew under purple grow lights. It was here that Thorn turned. He held the canister up, his finger on the release valve. 1 step closer and I drop it. He screamed, his eyes manic. "Everyone melts. Everyone." I froze. My gun was trained on his head, but if he fell, the canister would shatter. It was a standoff. Vance whispered in my ear, "There's a ventilation override on the wall to your left. If you trigger the emergency purge, it sucks the air out of the room. It will contain the gas, but you'll suffocate too." I looked at the switch. I looked at Thorn. I looked at Duke. I didn't have a choice. "Duke, back," I ordered. I slowly lowered my weapon, raising my left hand. Thorn smiled, thinking he had one. "Smart dog," he sneered. "Now, put the gun on the floor." I crouched as if to comply, but instead of placing the gun, I grabbed a heavy glass beaker from the table next to me and hurled it at the ventilation override switch. Smash. The system roared to life. Massive industrial fans spun up, creating an instant vacuum. The pressure change hit the room like a hammer. Thorn stumbled, losing his balance. That was the window. I lunged, tackling him before the canister hit the ground. I caught the silver tube with one hand and drove my elbow into Thorn's face with the other. Bone crunched. He went limp. The air was being sucked out fast. My vision started to tunnel. I grabbed the canister, grabbed Thorn's collar, and dragged them both towards the airlock door. Duke was already there, scratching at the steel. I punched the release code. Vance shouted in my ear. The door hissed open. We fell into the clean air of the alleyway, gasping. I looked down at the unconscious Alchemist. I searched his pockets and found a PDA. I checked the screen. A single encrypted message shipment confirmed. Destination: Rio de Janeiro. Target the water supply. I looked at Duke. Pack your bags, buddy. We're going to Brazil. The humidity in Rio hit us like a physical blow the moment we stepped off the cargo plane. It was a wet, suffocating heat that made my Berlin tactical gear feel like a coffin. We stripped down. Light armor, breathable fabrics, hidden holsters. Duke was panting, his tongue lolling out, but his eyes were scanning the chaotic skyline. We weren't on the beaches of Copacabana. We were looking up at rock in the largest favela in South America. A sprawling, vertical city of brick and tin stacked precariously on the mountainside. Vance's voice crackled in my ear, clearer now thanks to the new comms. Target Beta Hector El Santo Salamanca. He controls the water distribution for the entire sector, but he's not just a drug lord anymore, he's a subcontractor for the syndicate. Intel says he's retrofitting the main water treatment plant at the top of the favela to distribute Thorn's pathogen. If he opens the valves at dawn, 3 million people get infected before breakfast. I looked at the winding maze of narrow alleyways and stairs leading up. 1,000 windows, 1,000 hiding spots. We can't drive up there, I said, checking my pistol. We have to climb. And Vance, if I see a kid with a radio, do I shoot? In a favela, Marcus, the eyes are more dangerous than the guns. You stay unseen or you die. We moved at twilight. The shadows were our friends. The streets were too dangerous, controlled by teenage lookouts called Foglieti Rose. So we took the high road, the rooftops. It was park hour with a death penalty. We leapt from corrugated tin roofs to concrete slabs, sliding under laundry lines and vaulting over water tanks. Duke was built for this. He moved like a shadow, silent and agile, his claws gripping the rough concrete. We were halfway up the mountain when the rhythm of the favela changed. The funk music blasting from the speakers below cut out. A whistle blew, sharp and piercing, then another. Then fireworks went off. Not celebration fireworks. Signals, pop, 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 pop. We're burned, I whispered. Suddenly, bullets started chewing up the masonry around us. They weren't coming from the street, they were coming from the windows above. We were in a kill box. Move, I shouted, pushing Duke towards a gap between buildings. We jumped, crashing through a flimsy wooden awning and landing in a dusty attic. I rolled to my feet, weapon raised. We weren't fighting gangbangers with rusty revolvers. The Spersevis fire was accurate, automatic. The Syndicate's faceless men were here, and they were using the gang as meat shields. We fought our way up, house by house, turning the favela into a close-quarters battleground. By the time we reached the summit, my lungs were burning and Duke was covered in brick dust. The water treatment plant stood at the very top, a massive industrial complex of concrete cisterns and pipes. Guarded like a fortress, but it wasn't guarded by the gang. It was guarded by mercenaries in full tactical gear. I used my thermal scope to scan the perimeter. 6 tangos outside. A known number inside. I relayed to Vance. El Santo is inside. Vance confirmed. Satellite thermal shows a heat signature in the main control room. He's prepping the release sequence. You have 12 minutes before the automated cycle pumps that water into the city grid. We breached the perimeter, Vance using wire cutters. Stealth was critical again. I took out a sentry with a knife, quiet, respectful of the silence. We slipped into the main turbine hall. The sound of rushing water was deafening. It echoed off the concrete walls, masking our footsteps. In the center of the room, massive pipes fed into a central mixing tank, and hooked up to that tank were the same silver canisters we saw in Berlin. They were already connected. The poison was loaded. We located the control room, a glass box overlooking the facility. Inside, a man in a silk shirt was typing on a laptop, surrounded by 3 heavily armed guards. El Santo. He didn't look like a monster, he looked like a businessman. He was smiling as he initiated the sequence. I didn't wait for an invite. I kicked the door open, firing to control bursts. The guards dropped. El Santo spun around, reaching for a gold-plated pistol on the desk. But Duke was faster. He launched himself across the room, clamping his jaws around El Santo's gun arm. The drug lord screamed, the pistol clattering to the floor. I walked over, kicked the gun away, and jammed the barrel of my rifle into his cheek. "Stop the pump," I ordered. El Santo laughed, blood dripping from his arm. "It's already done, gringo. The valve is open. The virus is in the water. You can kill me, but you can't kill the flow." I looked at the screen. SYSTDMACTIV. Oh, IXINGINPROGRESS. Vance. I yelled. "How do I stop it?" "You can't stop the software," Vance replied, his voice calm. "You have to destroy the hardware. Blow the main mixing tank. It will flood the facility, but it will dilute the virus before it hits the grid. If I blow the tank, the water hits us," I said. "Then you better know how to swim." I grabbed El Santo by the collar. "You're coming with us." I dragged him to the catwalk. I pulled the last C for charge from my vest, primed it for 10 seconds, and threw it onto the main mixing valve below. "Run." We sprinted for the exit. 5, 4, 3. BOM. The explosion wasn't fiery, it was hydrostatic. The massive steel tank ruptured. High wall of water, millions of gallons of it, erupted outward with the force of a tsunami. It smashed through the facility walls, tearing pipes and walkways apart. The wave hit us just as we reached the outer door. It swept us off our feet, tumbling us into the muddy torrent cascading down the side of the favela. I grabbed Duke's harness with one hand and a rusty rebar sticking out of a wall with the other. We hung there, battered by the artificial river, watching the poison water wash harmlessly into the storm drains, diluted by the sheer volume. El Santo wasn't so lucky. I saw him for a second, flailing in the current, before he was swept over the edge of the cliff, disappearing into the dark jungle below. We hauled ourselves onto a concrete slab, gasping, soaked and alive. I checked El Santos' laptop, which I had shoved into my waterproof pouch. It was cracked, but the hard doctor was intact. Vance's voice came through, fuzzy with static. Target bait and neutralized. Water supply secured. Good work, Marcus. The drive. What's on it? I plugged it into my PDA. The screen flickered. A bank transfer. Massive amounts of cryptocurrency moving to a server farm in a new location. It points to the money, I said, wiping the mud from my face. Target Gamma, Dubai.
Dubai is a monument to human arrogance. A city of glass and steel built on shifting sand, defying the sun itself. We arrived via a private charter courtesy of El Santos stolen crypto wallet landing at Al Maktoum International. The heat was different here. Dry, serene, clean. It felt like walking into a kiln. We swapped our jungle rags for bespoke suits. Well, I wore the suit. Duke wore a specialized cooling vest disguised as a service dog harness. We weren't soldiers here. We were investors. Target Gamma Oleg Vostok. The banker. He wasn't just a money launderer. He was the syndicate's CFO. He operated out of the Spire of Sands, a hyper-secure residential tower that looked like a needle piercing the clouds. Vance briefed me in the back of a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Vostok lives in the penthouse, floor 160. It's not just an apartment. It's a server farm. The entire floor is a Faraday cage. No signals in or out. You can't hack it remotely. You have to physically insert the doctor into his mainframe. I looked up at the tower. It disappeared into the heat haze. How do we get up? I asked. The elevator requires a biometric scan. Vance said. Retina, voice, gait analysis. You can't fake it. So, you're not taking the elevator. You're taking the window washing rig. From the outside. The window too. Daryl feet screams. It doesn't blow. It tears at you. We accessed the maintenance rig from the 100th floor service deck. I strapped Duke into it in a harness on my chest. He was heavy, lured, and surprisingly calm. He trusted me. I hoped I deserved it. The rig was a narrow metal platform suspended by steel cables, swaying violently in the high-altitude currents. I engaged the magnetic climber's gloves and boots that locked onto the building's steel frame. We climbed the last 60 floors by hand. It was grueling. The glass of the building reflected the desert below, a dizzying abyss of beige and blue. My muscles burned, sweat stinging my eyes. Inside the windows, I saw flashes of lives, people eating lunch, maids cleaning, executives arguing completely unaware that a wolf and a soldier were crawling up the skin of their ivory tower. When we reached floor 160, the wind was deafening. I used a diamond-tipped glass cutter to score a circle in the reinforced pane. I attached a suction cup, tapped the glass, crack. I pulled the circle out. The pressure differential hissed. We were in. We dropped onto the floor of the penthouse. It wasn't a home. It was a refrigerator. The air was freezing cold, kept that way to cool the rows of black server towers that lined the walls like monoliths. There was no furniture, no art, just the hum of fans and the blinking of Bruel EDS. Vostok didn't live in luxury. He lived inside the machine. We moved through the aisles of data. Duke's ears twitched. He stopped, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He wasn't smelling a human. He was hearing servos at the end of the hall. In a glass-walled command center sat Vostok. He was a small man, hooked up to an IV drip, typing frantically on a holographic keyboard. He saw us on the reflection of his screen. He didn't run. He just pressed a single red button on his desk. "Intruder alert," a synthetic voice announced from the shadows between the server racks. They emerged. Not men, machines. Quadruped cell security drones, robot dogs clad in black armor, with tasers and submachine guns mounted on their backs. They moved with a terrifying, jerky precision. Duke barked, a sound of challenge against the unnatural. The organic wolf versus the mechanical pat. The first robot lunged. It was faster than a biological dog, but it lacked instinct. Duke sidestepped the mechanical pounce, snapping his jaws on the robot's hydraulic cable. Oil sprayed like black blood. The robot spazzed, its taser firing blindly. I didn't have time to admire the fight. The other two drones opened fire. I slid across the polished floor, taking cover behind a server rack as bullets shredded the data towers. Sparks showered down like fireworks. I pulled a specialized EMP grenade from my belt, Vance's gift. "Duke, clear," I shouted. Duke released the crippled robot and scrambled away. I rolled the grenade. Zap. A pulse of blue distortion rippled through the room. The lights died. The robots froze mid-step, their circuits fried, but Vostok's command center was shielded. The glass door was locked. I didn't bother picking the lock. I used the butt of my rifle to smash the glass. Vostok looked up, his eyes wide with terror. He wasn't a soldier. He was a coward with a keyboard. I grabbed him by his expensive lapels and slammed him onto the desk. "The transfer," I yelled. "Where is the money going?" He stammered, pointing at the screen. "Moscow. It's always Moscow. The red Citadel." I plugged in the drive. The download started. We had the ledger. We had the money trail. But then, the building shook. Not an explosion, a vibration, a sandstorm. The download completed just as the window turned orange. A massive hubbub, a wall of sand miles high, had hit the city. The sky vanished. The sun vanished. The building swayed like a reed in the wind. "We can't go back down the rig," I shouted over the comms. "The wind will tear us off the wall. You have to exit now." Vance surged. "Syndicate choppers are inbound. They'll be there in 2 minutes." There was only one way. I grabbed a parachute trig from the emergency locker Vostok had won for himself. The selfish prick. I strapped it on, securing Duke tightly to my chest again. "Trust me," I whispered to him. I looked at Vostok. "You're coming too." I cuffed him to a railing. "Wait for the police." I ran towards the broken window. The world outside was a swirling vortex of brown dust. Visibility was 0. I didn't hesitate. I jumped. Falling into a sandstorm is like falling into sandpaper. The wind roared, tossing us like a rag doll. I waited, counted the seconds. 3, 2, 1. I pulled the cord. The chute cracked open, jerking us upward. We drifted blindly through the storm, ghosts in the machine, descending towards the unseen desert floor. We had the money, we had the banker, and now we had the final destination, Moscow, the heart of the beast. Moscow welcomed us not with a parade, but with a blizzard that buried the city in white silence. We had jumped from a burning skyscraper in Dubai only 12 hours ago, and now we were standing in the shadow of the Kremlin walls. The cold was a physical weight pressing against my ribs, freezing the sweat inside my tactical suit. Vance was beside me, looking at the red stars atop the Kremlin towers with a strange nostalgia. The Tsar isn't in the Kremlin, he shouted over the wind. That's for the tourists and the politicians. The real power lies beneath. Target Omega the Tsar, the man at the top of the pyramid, the one who gave the orders to burn my house, to poison the water, to break the world. We moved through the empty expanse of Red Square, the snow crunching under our boots like crushed glass. Duke was shivering, his black fur stuck against the snow, but he stayed in formation. We stopped near the mausoleum. Vance knelt down, brushing the snow away from a nondescript utility grate. "This isn't a shore," he muttered, punching a code into a hidden keypad under the rim. "It's the entrance to Bunker 42, the Reed Citadel. Stalin built it. The Syndicate perfected it." The heavy iron grate hissed and slid open, revealing a concrete throat swallowing the light. We were walking into the belly of the beast, and for the first time, I felt a tremor in my hand. Not fear, anticipation. We descended 65 meters underground. The air changed from freezing fresh to stale, recycled, and metallic. We were in a secret spur of the Moscow Metro 2, a parallel train system built for the elite to escape Armageddon. But the station was abandoned. Dust lay thick on the marble floors, and the statues of Soviet heroes looked like ghosts in the beam of my tactical light. "The Tsar is in the command center," Vance said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty tunnel. "Sector 9. It's a straight shot." We walked along the tracks. Duke growled at the darkness. He smelled something I couldn't. "Wait," I whispered, raising my fist. From the shadows of the tunnel, they emerged. The Praetorian Guard, the elite of the faceless men. But they weren't attacking. They were standing at attention. 2 rows of heavily armored soldiers, flanking the path like an honor guard. They held their rifles across their chests, motionless. I aimed my weapon at the nearest one. "Why aren't they shooting?" Vance walked past me, his step lighter, more confident. He didn't raise his weapon. He just walked between the rows of killers as if inspecting his troops. Maybe they know the war is over, Marcus, or maybe they know who's coming. I kept my rifle trained on Vance's back. A cold not formed in my stomach. The trust I had built with him in Rio and Dubai began to crack like ice on a frozen lake. The command center was a massive circular room dominated by a holographic globe floating in the center. Screens covered the walls, showing live feeds of stock markets, troop movements, and satellite views. It was the brain of the world, but there was no one sitting in the chair at the head of the room. The throne was empty. Where is he? I asked, scanning the room for traps. Where is the Tsar? Vance walked up to the main console. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner. The system chimed a pleasant, welcoming sound. Access granted. Welcome back, Commander. Vance turned to face me. The tired, ragged old soldier I had pulled out of the shipyard was gone. In his place stood a man of terrifying power. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. You're looking at him, son. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Blacklist, the missions, Berlin, Rio, Dubai. You used me. I whispered. You didn't want to stop the syndicate. You wanted to clean house. They were getting ambitious. Vance said, spreading his hands. The Alchemist wanted to start a plague. El Santo wanted to become a god. Vostok was skimming profits. They were liabilities. I needed a scalpel to cut out the cancer so I could save the body. And you, Marcus, you are the sharpest blade I ever forged. I burned your house to wake you up. Vance continued, his voice calm, reasonable. I sent the mercenaries to test you. I gave you the list to purify my organization, and you did it perfectly. You saved the world from them, so you could hand it back to me. He pressed a button. The holographic globe turned red. New targets appeared. Washington, London, Beijing. Join me, Marcus. You were built for this. Be my right hand. We can bring order to this chaos. Or, he nodded to the shadows. The Praetorian Guard stepped out, weapons raised. Or you can eye as a hero who finished his mission. I looked at the map. I looked at the soldiers. I looked at the man who had been my father figure, my mentor, and now, my worst enemy. I dropped my rifle. It clattered loudly on the metal floor. Vance smiled. Smart choice. I'm not joining you, I said, reaching into my vest. And I'm not fighting them. I pulled out the ledger, the physical Blacklist book we risked our lives for. I'm resigning. I tossed the book into the air, and then I shouted the command I had taught Duke for the ultimate sacrifice. Duke, Jazaro. Duke didn't attack Vance. He didn't attack the guards. He attacked the central power coupling under the holographic table. He bit through the 400-volt main line. The room exploded in a shower of sparks and ozone. The lights died. The blast doors slammed shut, locking the system down. The Praetorians opened fire blindly in the dark, their muzzle flashes strobing like lightning. I didn't wait. I grabbed Duke, who was whimpering, smoke rising from his mouth, and rolled into the service hatch I had spotted earlier. We slid down the chute, tumbling into the freezing darkness of the old sewer system, leaving the chaos behind us. We emerged hours later, miles away, on the banks of the frozen Moskva River. The sun was rising, pale and weak. Duke was limping, his fur singed, but he was walking. I was battered, bleeding, and empty. Vance was alive. I knew that. He was trapped in his dark citadel, ruling over a broken kingdom, but I had taken something from him. The ledger was gone, burned in the electrical fire. His network was exposed. His lieutenants were dead. I looked at the horizon. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I wasn't a pawn. I was the ghost in the system. The one variable Vance couldn't calculate. "Come on, buddy," I whispered to Duke, the steam of my breath mixing with the cold morning air. "We have work to do." We walked into the white mist, vanishing from the world of men, ready to become their nightmare.